that was coaching through a system versus coaching the person. Because we had a system, we trusted it. It worked before. Why isn't it working now? Because humans are messy, and humans are very different, and we need to work with the human rather than the process.
Welcome to the podcast that helps speakers and writers like you grow their impact and income. This is Stage, Page, and Screen. In preparation for our conversation, yes, I rewatched your TEDx Nelson talk, and I was digging into the YouTube analytics of the most replayed moment. Now, the most replayed moment of that talk, do you have a guess of what it is?
It's the Woodrow Wilson quote.
Yes. Yeah. So what about that quote and this idea of brevity when it comes to public speaking? Why do you think that resonated so much?
I think it's because, for one, people probably never heard it before as a quote. They know the person probably, but they've never heard the quote. And then as a first run, you think it's cute, right? You kind of very quickly scan it. And I don't say it for your brain, Jesse. So it's just like, I put it up there and let people read it because I trust people can read it. And then I just talk to it. So I think then, because I don't read it, people expect that. So they quickly go to it, and then probably they just read it again. I think it's more practicality rather than, ooh, that was significantly arresting, I have to go again on that. But maybe I'm wrong, because maybe it is something that made people pause and rewind.
Do you make a habit of always not reading a slide if there's text on it? Because literally 30 seconds later, you put up 3 bullet points, which are pithy, a great point, and hilarious. The 3 points being guns don't kill people, bullet point 1, bullet point 2, bullets kill people, bullet points kill attention.
Yeah.
So in that instance, you read those slides.
Correct.
You read those bullet points. So what is the difference between a moment where you might have a slide with some words on it and you just let the audience do their thing versus there's a strategic or thoughtful reason as to why you are specifically reading the slide?
So the reason why I didn't read the quote is because I want someone to feel and hear that quote being read in their own voice in their head. The second option, as you said, the bullet points, was more a mechanic. So it didn't matter that they were reading it in their own voice. It didn't need to have the arresting point. The point was more that, look, I'm illustrating how you read bullet points. The bullet point could have been anything, but you're quite right. I'm trying to make a joke out of it as well. But as you can see, there's 2 different reasons.
Yes.
So they're not as important to read in your own voice. And when you read something in your own voice, apparently it sticks better than when someone else is reading it. If you've been asked to read it. Yeah,
I was curious to get your director's cut of that moment because my outside assessment thought, okay, maybe the first thing, because it is something you just want them to internalize, you want them to read it. The second, I thought, well, now he's saying those words because this is ending in a joke. This is ending with a punchline, and a punchline in a joke has to be delivered really, really, really in a specific way. So I almost thought it's like, I trust the audience to take in this thoughtful piece of information, but I need to be the expert of this joke and be the one to deliver it because I know how it needs to be delivered. Yeah, is there any truth in that idea?
No, that's an even better. I'm going to steal that as a reason why I did it that way.
That's fine.
Thank you.
Now, I know that you practice minimalism. So I was curious if you think there are any tenets of minimalism that play into speech writing.
So speechwriter, I don't know if I'm a speechwriter. So I don't know if it does or not. Probably just because minimalism is a big thing in my life. I try not to have things. But you're right. Maybe it does in my writing, I'm a bit what am I trying to say? Punchy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So maybe it does, because I don't write my speeches, as you know. And in the review blog post about TEDx Nelson, I don't know if you found that, I can send that to you. I actually put up how I wrote that talk. And it's a bunch of 5 post-it notes that I played with and moved them around, as you do, writing the points, and then you move them around to see which flow works best. Like I obviously didn't just go up there and jazz it. I did have some preparation to it. The only thing I wrote in inverted commas as part of that speech is the opening line. And I knew I had to, in call and response, close it out with the opening line. So I didn't need to write that. Just had to come full circle to close it out. So that was the only thing I wrote. So in terms of minimalism, I suppose I did do it because I was very minimal in my speech writing. That's the only thing I would say. Yeah.
I guess I wonder, for someone like you who sort of has this minimalist point of view in their personal life, if, even though, yes, I recognize you're not writing the speech, you're more sort of outlining the big moments. I wonder if you find yourself in a situation when you're creating a talk where you have to work hard to add a little more versus some speakers, their tendency might be to start with too much, and then they need to go through and declutter and say, hey, do I really need to have 7 of these shirts? Would 4 do? Do I really need to have 3 bikes? Wouldn't 1 just do? Do you think there's any truth to that?
Totally. But as you know, probably, I don't want to put words in your mouth. You come full circle with this, right? When you first start doing this, you overcompensate. And then over time, you develop habits, procedural habits, whatever, or approaches that are reductionists. So you reduce down and just like learning any skill, you learn nuances so you don't have to devote enough time on other things now. And speechwriting for me was overkill, first of all, and then was very quickly something I trusted myself with, because most of the times I spoke from lived experience. And I just had 1 slide. So I could just remember that the visual, my notes and speech, in a sense, was the slide. So I'm visually attuned rather than word attuned. That's my approach to life anyway. So if I see the slide and go, I'll tell that story. How it falls out of my mouth, I'm going to trust it, because I've done this a couple of times before. And then over time, that's just become more and more condensed or concentrated. That's a better way of putting it. And therefore, I just don't use any types of writing when I do a speech. So someone's come into me and said, would you like to present? And it's a kind of in inverted commas, new approach that I'm taking, or new topic or something. I will literally start with images first of stories that I know, and then bullet points. And kind of that's my approach now. So it's just different approaches. Now, I don't try and teach that to people, because I obviously, when I'm working with clients in a speaker coaching context, I learn from them what's their behavioral approaches to learning, to delivery, to development. And then I work with that. And then I add in my approach, obviously, so they can see if there's something they can steal. But that's kind of maybe important to talk about, is like habits and approaches for one person shouldn't be expected from another. And especially when you're training / coaching / teaching, whatever way you want to frame it, is that you got to work with the person's approaches. Does that make sense?
Yeah. What do you now, this next question I'm going to ask you is a very selfishly oriented question, because I find myself in this situation and I wonder what I will look back on in 5 years and go, my approach wasn't quite right here. So the question is this, DK, what do you think public speaking coaches who are current or former speakers themselves get wrong about how they coach other speakers?
I'm just going to lean into what I just said, in the sense of, I see people, and this comes down to the form I filled out. You asked one of the failures, and we said we were failing one of our speakers because we were expecting them to deliver in the way that we were coaching them. So that story is lovely because very quickly there was a lady who we were asking, as part of TEDx Wellington, to stand, on that little red dot and deliver in a way through a modality that was expected and learned. And we've done it a couple of times before. So we were trusting and trusted of that. And we were failing her because she couldn't do it, but we were like expecting her to do it. And the shorter version of this story is literally we sat her on a chair. And then she became intimate. Then she became comfortable, because before then she wasn't either. And that was that was coaching through a system versus coaching the person, because we had a system. We trusted it. It worked before. Why isn't it working now? Because humans are messy, and humans are very different, and we need to work with the human rather than the process. And both, I suppose, rather than just leave one to the other. But in that case, it's a beautiful story because she was a funeral director, and her approach to communicating that, why she needed a chair, was extractive, because we had to really dig deep and then find that chair as the kernel to make her comfortable in delivering her talk. Until we did that, it was all falling over. We weren't going to even put her on stage.
Do you think you would have that same approach if you didn't have that impending deadline of the event approaching?
Yeah.
Meaning I'm asking, is the greater skill for her to have learned eventually was how to be able to stand and deliver, or was it just that time pressure that you thought, okay, maybe this isn't the ideal outcome, but this is the best outcome we can help produce and manufacture given our short time period?
Good point. Yeah. I don't think we even went there. It was more like, shit, of course we're missing this. and we were failing her up until that point. By the way, that was week 4 of week 5 of a training experience we put all our TEDx speakers through. So it was towards the end of it. So we were kind of in panic mode, to be honest with her. And I can tell that story because it is quite an arc of discovery, but an arc of failure from our perspective, but also a big arc of learning, and then the application of, you've got to create the conditions as a speaker that's best for you. And this comes back to some of my other coaching when I work with people. One of my things, I don't know if you got through my book, but maybe you raced through in terms of the chapter headings. Be a diva is one of them. The idea of create the condition, and I don't ask, it's not about asking for blue M&Ms and silly things. It's about creating conditions that enable you to shine as a speaker. That might be, I only work from Keynote because Keynote is the best, beautiful artifacts for me to tell stories, right? Or I need an iPad on stage because I'm a scriber. As I talk, I illustrate on things, so that's a technical side of things, right through to what's the best mic that you wear. Because you can't hold the mic because you're very expressive. You come from Italian stock. You're not going to just hold something there. You want to do this. And people don't even know how to hold mics. We all know this when we stand people and people is given a mic and they just, it's loud. I'll hold it further away from my mouth. No, that's what mics do. They amplify. So stick it there and let the sound people sort it out, right? Yeah. We've all been in those situations. But again, that's the conditions for success. If you as a speaker aren't asking for these things, and it might be a chair, it might be I want the light's really low, because I'm trying to create a condition of atmosphere, because what I talk about is highly charged emotionally, and as we know, having darker rooms, you're more emotionally comfortable as an audience to receive that stuff, but it's really bright, so all these conditions for success, it's really important as a speaker for you to know, and then when a coaching perspective, then for you to even know these bloody things, right? If you're coaching people and being pure, like I like to see people versus I don't mind lights in my eyes. Some people like I prefer a lit stage because then I can't see people. It's just less fear for me. As we know, we stand on a stage and you can only see the front row. To me, I like to see the people. If they're crossing their arms, if they're confused, and they can linger on a point, or if they're like surprised or something, I can lean in and nod to them and bring them in. So again, all those are just creating the conditions to shine. Be a diva.
Yeah, I very much enjoyed that chapter of your book, and I mentioned this in the intro, but I think your book, Speaking with Purpose, it's so well done. It's so well done. And I have some nerdy questions I'm going to ask you about about that later. But to this diva point, I think you make an important point, and I think most of the folks that listen to these conversations are out there doing a decent amount of sort of speaking gigs. They're getting hired, and this idea of being a diva could be misconstrued. And to me, the difference I always make is, this is about asking for what you need in advance of the event. So if you show up the day of the event, there's been no pre-communication that you want the house lights dim, or you want the house lights bright, or it's got to be keynote and it needs to be run from my computer. If these things are last minute, then indeed you're being the worst possible definition of a diva, because it's last minute, it's unprepared, there was no pre-communication. But if you at the point of signing the contract, 6 weeks out from the event, 4 weeks out from the event, 2 weeks out from the event, on that final check-in call, are communicating, hey, here's just 2 or 3 things that might seem a little unorthodox or a little unusual to you, but to me, help me serve your audience as well as possible. So that's not only wise, but will actually serve the audience better.
Yeah. And that could be as simple as, water, as we know, on the stage or something. But it could be through, I've seen technical speeches where it needs physical things, and I've seen things where you just have a lot of props. These are conditions for success that might throw up other people. And you've got to have a pre-chat, right? Especially if you're working at scale, if it's a big conference and things like that. And especially if you're working with something like a TEDx, because sometimes those are run by volunteers who are just doing it for the heart. But from a technical perspective, they might need a little bit more help, because it's just speaking, right? And it's like, well, no, because I was at one, I won't say this in the interview, but I was at a TEDx event recently, and I was so fidgeting in my chair because I could see the stage wasn't set up for the conditions. So for the speakers then to shine in the best way they can. And this is where, OCD can really help, or your ADHD, because like you sit there and you go, oh, I know that they lit the speakers well so they could record them, because that's part of the TEDx process. But the way they've lit it washed out the screen, the projector, right? And we all, know what happens there. Now, the fidelity of the visual experience is massively masked because of the lighting situation. Now, when you get into producing your own events, then you can really do your nerdy thing and try to advocate for all that stuff. But as a diva, again, if it's a speaker and you turn up, like I remember I did a gig in Munich a few months ago, and I turned up. Now I've got a little bit of a rider, and I've turned up, and I had to change it because I didn't think to put on my rider. I don't want to be projecting onto a white wall. I was projecting onto a brown orangey wall.
Okay.
They didn't have screen or anything like that. No,
beautiful.
Oh man,
I know. And colors now are totally changed.
Yes,
But I show little videos. I have beautiful things that I amplify kind of my messages, and now it just looks shit.
Yes.
And I'm supposed to be a great speaker coach. Well, no, that's a dissolution of my brand in a sense. You got to protect that, right?
So what did you do in that situation?
I had to roll with it, and then I obviously gave caveat right at the beginning and said, really sorry about this. I just had to roll, and then I changed my rider, and then I changed my little conditions, because I'm like, I've never had this situation. I need to add this to that one then.
That's why I always bring white paint with me whenever I go to a speaking gig. Anyway, it's something you guys can use.
Yeah. You got to, you got to be, if you're a professional, you got to be willing to also step up and paint the wall if necessary.
Paint the wall, definitely. I like that, man. Thank you.
In your role as a speaker coach, I want to take this question from sort of the negative perspective. What are some common denominators of a speech or a talk that was an excellent idea that ended up poorly delivered? What are some of the inverse things we can learn from of folks that had a great idea. They pictured this idea of what their talk was going to be about. And you're like, that sounds fantastic. And then the end product of it was not that great. What are some through lines with those you've seen?
I don't know if I've had any real oh my God moments that sounded off, that sounded great, that started great, that looks awful on delivery. The only time I've ever had those moments is when either something goes wrong technically, and you can see that we forgot to coach them on what happens when things go wrong. So that's out of the person's hands. And then the second time is obviously when they dry up, they forget things, they miss their beat, the reason they were telling that bit of the story. The crescendo piece, the underline that made it worth me listening to that. They mucked that up a little bit. But generally, I've never seen anything start great and end up awful. And that's an interesting question, because obviously you guys have in that regards.
Well, maybe. I mean, sometimes to me in speaking, everything is about how you end up delivering it. Some ideas I've heard for a talk, I thought, that is insane. Under no circumstance speak on that topic or give that angle or that approach. There is no way whatsoever under the sun that will work. And sometimes I'm proven completely wrong. And I love that. I mean, I have no connection with Susan Cain, but I think about Susan Cain's TED Talk on introversion. And I get, if Susan was to approach me and said, of all the things I could talk about, this is the thing I think I'm going to talk about. I could have seen myself saying, why would you do that? And then it's also a bit contradictory. You're doing an extroverted activity about the topic of introversion. Aren't you contradicting yourself in the delivery of the talk? And so, I find I can be surprised on either end of the spectrum.
So now you've given that story, I can definitely give you that story about my first ever TEDx experience, which speaks to that. So I was invited to speak at TEDx, which will go unnamed. And it was my first TEDx experience. And they trusted me because they'd seen me. So they had a trust level of going, we trust you to speak on whenever you like. Wrong way to go about it. Because I try to be clever. I try to develop and devise a whole new talk that I've never done before. All about inspiration, not about what I was doing at the time. And they were like, yeah, that sounds great, and I was the opening TEDx.
No pressure.
And yeah, at the time I didn't think. I thought it was a cool thing to do, but looking back, and I've even asked TEDx, you can't find this talk, because I've asked them to take it down.
Yeah.
Because not that it was shit from a perspective of like, oh, that guy's bombing or whatever. It was more like it didn't speak to whom I am. It didn't give a good register, I suppose, of why you should give a TED talk as well, or TEDx talk. Because TEDx is all about, ideas worth spreading. It should be something that you've done, not just an idea. And mine was just an idea with no validation, no pedigree in that space. And that's a lot of the time when we've done the speaker coaching. A lot of people apply for TEDx's, obviously the stuff that I've run, the many years that I've done it. And most of the time people are applying just with an idea rather than an idea. And here's the stuff I've been doing for the last 5, 6, 10, 15 years with it, maturing out the idea. And this is the discovery and why people should be doing X with the idea. That was me. I just had the idea, and it was silly, and it didn't serve anybody in that room, let alone me. But everybody was like cool about it at the time. Now,
you mentioned you had the video taken down, but we found the video. Jesse, do you want to pull that up?
That's right. I'm going to go ahead and play that.
In the room, when you delivered it live, I know you wanted the video killed later, but in the room live, do you feel like it went well?
I thought it went all right.
Okay.
I wouldn't say even well, just all right. I think people were bemused and kind of like, okay, cool. Why is this? Okay, it's rather lofty and idea. We were just talking about inspiration and the concept of, but I have no right talking about that. And I wasn't doing anything in that in terms of professional or personal stuff. It was just, I thought, TEDx is all about inspiring people. I'll talk about that and try to take a very lofty goal to it. Versus at the time when you and I met, it was around that time, Josh. So I was running my social media companies, and when it was new media.
Yes.
Before it was social media. So it was very much, and that's what I should have spoke on. Because that's what I was doing.
I don't know if I ever told you this, DK, but my first speech when I got started at 19 or whatever, back in the olden days.
Just a couple of years back.
This is 100% true. Was called slaw. Like, do you know coleslaw?
Yes.
Okay. So my speech was called Slaw, the Recipe for Success. And the whole thing was one big analogy about the different ingredients in coleslaw and how there are different ingredients in life you need to be successful as a young person.
I'm writing this down. This is brilliant. Gold.
Oh, it's so bad. It was so bad.
All around. That is beautiful.
I don't think it
is. Like you say, Jesse, writing that down and going,
absolutely.
Actually, that is a good metaphor.
He'd been eating coleslaw for 5, 6, 10 years before that. And so he has the experience. He's bringing that to bear.
Yeah, I mean, I've tried to wipe most of it from my memory, but I recall I would begin by saying mayonnaise. Mayonnaise is a key ingredient in coleslaw. It holds everything together. But who here just wants to eat a tablespoon of mayonnaise? Hands? Anybody? Well, that is like, yes, that is like your education. It holds and binds everything together. But education alone is not the answer to success.
That's
in
quite
life.
deep.
But kind of.
Well, I'm surprised that didn't make it to a TED or a summit or a World Domination Summit stuff, and get on those big stages. C2 Montreal is now writing this down, going to phone you and say, could you bring that back?
I would know in advance, but anyone else is welcome to take it.
Mayonnaise 2025.
That's right. Anyone else is welcome to take it and run with it. I want to talk about one of your sort of unorthodox philosophies, which is that you can't practice public speaking. It's just something. Public speaking is a skill of exposure. I somewhat disagree with you, but before I disagree with you, I want to hear your philosophy on this firsthand.
Yes, public speaking can't be practiced, full stop. By the nature of what it describes, like speaking in public. So you can't gather probably 100 people that you don't know to sit neatly and have a mic ready to hear your voice back with a new clicker. You can't kind of practice that. You can definitely prepare for those, as we talked about being a diva, ask for certain conditions. And also you can prepare emotionally how you're going to feel and how to deal with all the emotions when it comes to public speaking, because you hopefully would have had some experience before. So you know how you're going to react. Yeah. And you can also prepare what you're going to say and how you're going to say it and the way it's going to be said as well, and the stresses points and all that. So preparation is a better approach to practice when it comes to getting better at public speaking. Now, it's an earned skill rather than a learned skill, at the end of the day. So I can sit with someone who's never spoke in public before and just talk at them and give them everything and you could do the same, Josh, and maybe that could be a fun experiment. Find someone who's never done it and just try to impart as much as possible and then get them on the stage to
get them out there with the coleslaw speech.
There we go. And see how well they do. Yeah. In an environment where it's high tension or whatever and stuff like that. Cool. And we might guess some way because we've imparted so much to them versus someone who's done it maybe half a dozen times, and then you're talking to them about the conditions of that and controlling maybe their breathing, or because they speak too fast, which we know it's not about speaking too fast. It's if you slow down their breathing, they will speak slower. So it's not the speaking fast that's the problem. It's because you're breathing too fast, because your breath is so shallow, because you're really nervous, and therefore you're sucking in really fast, and you just want to get to the end as well. And people are looking at me, and oh my God, I'm food. Because the lizard brain is kicking in, and it's about controlling all those narratives in your brain. So it's a deconstruction of the experience and preparation of it versus, I've practiced my speech so many times at home, in front of my cat, in front of my spouse, in front of the mirror, and every one of them said it was great. Mm-hmm. So isn't it great when I stand in front of the school board to deliver it, or my peers, or the board to try and get more money for my thing? I was great at home. Why is this different? Because the conditions are different. So therefore, preparing it over practicing, because we all know the kind of big thing out there is practice, practice, practice. And I always say prepare versus that. And that's my flag in the stand and the hill that I'll die on when it comes to public speaking. Because you're right, it is a different approach. And for some people, and I'll end with this, is I've seen so many people stand and they're so practiced, but the problem is they're disconnecting themselves from the experience and the audience because they're so versed. Mm-hmm. And you can see some people sometimes up there, and you can see their eyes are going back and forth as they're speaking, because in their mind, they're literally reading from the script that they've read how many times before to practice. And they're reading it in their brain. And you can see their eyes going back and forth like they're scanning the paper again, but they're not looking at the audience. They're not connecting with them. And they're reading like they're speaking like they're reading. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Rather than allowing the speech patterns to just flow and the stress points to come out easily enough. So that's why, you can also practice wrong.
Mm-hmm. I definitely agree with your take here on you can't manufacture the conditions. You can't manufacture the conditions, the stressors, the excitement, the nerves, the level of pressure, the stakes when you're just practicing at home. I guess my main rebuttal, and I'd be curious what your take on this would be, is if I'm working on something new, I do find it quite helpful to, and maybe we're just parsing words here, but I do find it quite helpful, pardon my language, to practice, I know you don't like that word, practice certain key sentences out loud,
right?
Just as a way to kind of go, okay, I don't write out everything, but if it's a key moment, if it's a key emotional moment, if it's a key thought, or if it's a key joke, I do try to get a bit more clinical with that, because in those instances, I feel there's a big difference between a 7-word sentence and a 9-word sentence. In those instances, the nuances really matter. So those things I will practice and say out loud 10, 20, 30 times as I'm running, as I'm driving, to see how do these words feel in my mouth. As I say this out loud, does this sound like me? So is that practice, or is that something different?
I think it's both in that context. You're preparing those key anchor points in your speech, right?
Yes.
You're preparing them, and you're preparing your body and your mind and even your mouth, right? To feel them out. And so that when you get there, that you're versed in them or practiced in them. I would say versed, right? And what you're doing is more preparing than practicing, I think, there. But practice in that context is not bad. You're not practicing your talk. You're practicing elements of your talk that you need to nail. That TEDx Nelson speech that I gave, I practiced the opening line. Yeah. Like you just said. I did exactly what you said. And I practiced different ways of saying it. And I settled on one, and you'll hear me stand up there and say, how would you feel if I asked you to stand up in front of 100 people that you don't know, to share personal, professional stories, to inspire and delight? I know it now because I practiced it.
Yes.
But I made sure I knew that one, that it was an anchor, right? That away I went. Once I nailed that, I could just flow. And for some people, you're right, there's a few of those that they need to practice to nail. And that's fine in that context. But I'm just saying, as a whole, as a discipline, it's not a practice. That's why, any other discipline, it's like sport. I hate to use a sport analogy, but it's a nice one. Why people talk about match fitness or game time, giving people game time, because they're great practicing with their mates. On the practice field, they look good, but for someone in a game scenario, as you just said, the conditions are very different. And it's against someone they don't know, who literally wants to win more than their mates do. Yeah. And they want to hit them as hard, stuff like that. Or even when you're practicing in a music analogy, just, jamming with your mates in a garage, very different to be paid to do a gig at a wedding. And some people, really light the garage up. And they're bouncing around, they're jumping off the speakers, and like, this is going to be the best wedding ever when we go and do this. And then suddenly there's 100 people they don't know staring at them, and they've got to now, rock out on the acts, and they're not as exuberant. You think, what's happened? Because I've been in both scenarios. That's why I used to play sport and I used to play in bands. So I know these things. I'm like, man, they're so jolly, and now they're just standing there. And it's because the conditions have changed. They're unprepared for it,
And for full transparency, you were the guitarist at my wedding, and I was highly disappointed because I saw the footage from the garage. I thought, this is what we need.
The speakers weren't big enough to jump from. That was the problem, Josh.
That's right.
Exactly. And I was told, please, no nakedness.
Yes. Yeah. Well, you said there was an extra fee for it. So that's why at the time I declined. It wasn't out of desire. It was being young and on a budget.
There you go.
And Granny was there, right? And she had a heart condition at the time, and we didn't want to, anyway, that's a whole metaphor we're going down now.
Yeah, back to coleslaw.
Please do.
Yes. I want to go back a few minutes. You said sometimes you can see in a speaker as they're up there, their eyes are going left to right because they're sort of, reciting this memorized, written out script that they have.
Mm.
I want to talk about a similar but distinctly different thing, which is for some speakers out there, and I had a period of a couple of years of this, where they're sort of a gigging speaker, and they developed this talk. At first, they begged anyone to hire them. No one would. Eventually, people start hiring them. And then they experience the great joy of success. But from success, now they're going out there giving the same talk dozens or hundreds of times. So something that those folks, and I was in this camp for several years, can be guilty of is they're not up there sort of thinking back to their script. They just flip on a switch and out comes the 60-minute speech with no contextualization, no connection, and not really, they have a far greater skill than they did 3 years ago when they wished people would hire them. But there's also, their connection is kind of burned out. They sort of don't care as much as they promised themselves they would if anyone ever gave them a chance.
Yeah.
What would you say to that person?
I'd say, first of all, that's a challenge, right? Because what would you say to that person? Because they're nailing it. They're getting 100 gigs, like you said, a year. And if they're successful in inverted commas and people are still booking them in, then why change a winning formula? So I would say, first of all, do they want to change? Do they even recognize what you've just recognized? First of all, if they have that reflection, if they have that self-reflection, and go, oh, I'm just turning up and just putting the LP on and sitting in the corner in my mind, and I'm just, it's a cover band now versus oh, they're playing this for the first time, or the first album just dropped, and now they're really loving still the music is still so close to them versus 20 years down the line, and they're just like, okay, we're gonna have to play Brown Sugar again. It's like, okay, here we go, because it's expected from our audience. We're just gonna have to big up Rolling Stones. But the point I suppose I'd make is I've been really lucky. I've never been in that situation, Josh, for a couple of reasons, because I was speaking either about new technologies and online worlds and shit like that, which was constantly evolving. So even though I had through lines to my talks in the 6 years that I bounced around 5 continents speaking about this emerging stuff, this was back in the day when, Vox and Zanga and LiveJournal and MySpace was still kicking around. So it was emerging fields.
The good old
Remember
days.
those
good old days?
The good old days, yeah. Because of that emergence in the field that I was speaking about, there was always new stories that I could update the talk with. And it had to be updated. So the field that I was speaking to had to reflect in my speech or talk or presentation. So it kept it fresh for me. I do find myself a little bit in that situation now when I'm delivering what I call masterclasses on public speaking or purposeful storytelling. And it's the same talk that I give at the beginning, although I've just started to update it a lot, especially because, God bless new technologies, the AI stuff, which hopefully we'll have a chat about, and the Mid-Journey stuff relating to imagery and storytelling through all that side of things. So I've started to update my decks relative to, there are new tools on the market that will help you give a greater presentation and a visual presentation. And then I've updated my approaches because of COVID and new technologies. And now I'm doing a lot of coaching how to present engagingly online. And I've got back into the geek mode because I bought like new hardware, like, Elgato Stream Decks and stuff, new mics and new cameras, and then new lighting. Or I don't buy new lighting, I just make my own lighting, which is real fun. And stuff like that, which again is an evolution of the stories and the practices. But it's probably got same through lines, which, as you saw from my talk, the TEDx Nelson one, there's still a foundation, which I only discovered doing the TEDx coaching, which is, that credibility, that resonance piece, and the other one I can't remember now.
Grace is the third one. Yeah.
Grace is the third one. And they apply all across the board to any situations. But what's changed is just, again, the conditions, the technology, the formats. Which is kind of fun.
So when you're going out doing these master classes, the core tenets, grace, credibility, resonance, those aren't starting to feel like the cover song to you simply because it doesn't sound like you're rewriting the whole song, but it sounds like you're kind of adding a fourth chorus. Is that fair? And then that fourth chorus gives you the appropriate level of nerves for you to not be able to just flip on the cover song?
I'd like to maybe use that analogy instead of doing fourth chorus. I'm laying down a different beat.
With coleslaw.
Exactly.
Got it. I'm tracking.
Thank you.
And with that we're out. We're done.
Yeah.
There we go. Thank you very much for coming. Because the conditions, again, coming back to the audience, right, changes constantly. So if I'm going to deliver a masterclass at a theater, for theater people, by the way, the staff of the theater, that's very different than if I'm going to do it for architects. And it needs a little bit of a different beat, a different foundational approach to it, which is why I come back to the beat. And as an ex-drummer, that's the foundation of things. So I will start differently, and I will try to add, hopefully, reflected nuances into it, because I understand a little bit, enough about a little of their industries to say to architects, for example, when you're pitching your renders to the potential client versus a theater people is when you're pitching either the board or the funders or the endowment people who are coming in. There's different reasons to give talks in different scenarios. I can then mix it up differently. And they're doing it through different mediums as well, to different audiences. So the beat analogy, I think, is a better way to create different approaches to similar things that I'm delivering.
Hi, friends. It's Jesse Rice, co-host and producer of the podcast. Normally, you'd hear from Josh at this point, offering you the opportunity to learn more about how to launch or grow your speaking business or write and publish your book. But since I also edit the podcast, I just cut his part right out. That gives me the opportunity to do the pitching, but from the perspective of someone who is a former student of the program and someone that has benefited tremendously from the wisdom and experience and the countless practical insights that make the Stage, Page, and Screen training program so powerful. Look, Josh isn't paying me to say this. I do it for the community service hours. My point is, and all kidding aside, as one that has truly benefited in massive, life-changing, dream-come-true kind of ways from this content, I can't recommend Stage, Page, and Screen highly enough. And I really mean that. To go and learn more for yourself about making your speaking and writing dreams come true at stagepagescreen.com. That's stagepagescreen.com. Now, back to the show.
I want to pivot to the topic of virtual speaking. And I want to begin with a question about how you developed your taste, because, we're friends and have been for quite some time. Mm-hmm. And something I've always seen with you, and I really saw the full maturity of this in the Creative Welly video series, which is that you have such a high standard with the look and feel of a virtual thing, whether it's a virtual product, like your book is very well designed, very thoughtfully designed, or that Creative Welly video series, which is, free and people can watch. How can we as speakers and writers develop that taste and that high standard? Because sometimes folks will bring me a slide deck and they'll go, "This is phenomenal. This is phenomenal." I'll open it up, I'll vomit, and I'll think, how can I tell this person that this is terrible? So it seems like some folks have taste and some don't. But is taste, which you have so well, is that something that can be developed so that we can self-critique our own stuff?
I hope so, to answer that final question, because taste is, I suppose, a muscle, right? That's been developed over time, but it's got to be developed in the right way, because somebody never not stopped listening to NSYNC because they thought that was the threshold of mastery when it comes to, music
and you're saying
their taste. And I'm just saying, why wouldn't you, listen to NSYNC and stop there? And I'm not saying it's bad or anything. I'm just saying there's more genres to be informed by.
Yes.
And I suppose that's where taste comes from. It's a pebble in the stream, right? That's been ground round and stuff. And it's gone through the journey of experiencing lots of different formats, mediums. And I suppose I've only come to thank you for the nice compliments about that you think I have good taste. I just think I'm trying stuff. I look at it and even Creative Welly, and that's a beautiful example of me trying to do something very different in an overpopulated white man genre, which is podcasting, even though we're three white guys on a podcast right now. Right? Here we go.
I take offense to that.
Okay, sorry. I apologize.
I'm not, yeah.
I apologize, man.
I'm completely forgiven.
Thank you, man.
That was trying to make a joke. Didn't land. We'll cut that out.
Oh, because you never know, right? Because you could be sarcasm. Like, dude,
I'm sorry, guys.
Jesse's sarcasm isn't for everyone.
I had that feeling. Man, I just...
Oh, dude, I'm so sorry. No.
It was fun.
I like those. Okay. Well, I'm offended. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you very much. But it is a genre that's populated by, privileged white people who have, enough time in their hands to do this. So I wanted to step into that and do something beautiful And I just, as you mentioned, it's been a project been going for a while, but I just wrapped it up. We're not doing it anymore. And we did 50 episodes, 100 people. And I wrote a review blog post with the title of A Study in Human Intimacy. I think it's where you start with this stuff. Like you spoke about the deck that you were given. Where did they start from? Right? Because for them, it was excellence personified, but you don't know where they're starting from. And I see this a lot with other events that I go to and someone stands, and it's hard to not critique, especially if you have some, and I still learning, but some, I suppose, mastery in a discipline. So if you do play the bass amazingly well, which I know you, Josh, slap at the bass, love the bass. You know, you love it.
Indeed.
So that when you go to Rush concerts, you just go, yeah, the bass is just rocking out. But when you have a skill level in something, you can't but help critique it, right? But I always remind myself if I'm seeing something on stage who maybe is awkward, got bad slide decks and stuff, I don't know where they started from. Because 2 months ago, they might not have had a slide deck. They might not have ever done this before. So I want to celebrate people who try. But definitely that doesn't mean they should stop there. Mm-hmm. And it's definitely that you shouldn't then go, that was great. Mm-hmm. You should say, I want to celebrate your action. I want to celebrate what you delivered there. I'm happy to give you some feedback if you're seeking that, but if not, just enjoy what you've just done. So the taste side of things has been developed over probably years of me just curating and creating and consuming a lot of this stuff. Because as I mentioned, I've been in new media space for a while. I was creating video podcasts back in 2007. And they were awful, right? But I was trying, even back then when we had tape in the video, to try and get that digital and shit like that. It was so much fun. And then over the years, because of technology and stuff like that, you can now do things beautifully. And there's so many platforms to help you to do things beautifully now online. But you still need to know what beauty looks like or what excellence looks like. Yes. And that comes through years of just being aware, just being, oh, that's different to that. Why is it? And probably having that question in your brain about, ooh, if I had to, how would I?
That I think your line there of knowing what excellence looks like. These folks that I'm thinking of as I ask you these questions, that is the central struggle. These are folks I know who are excellent speakers. Their craft is fantastic. And I'll push them, say, hey, your speech is up here. Your slides are down here. We need to get the visual component to match how good the actual talk is. And so then I'll try to guide them and I'll say, look, don't go on Fiverr. No doubt there are some probably great designers there, but just percentage-wise, it's going to be trickier to find them. So go to something like Dribbble that's a bit more sort of designer snobby, and just find someone there. But even then, it is if though they can go to Dribbble, which is populated by 95% outstanding designers, and they will find the 5% that isn't that great, and then they'll pay them. Now they've entered into an arrangement with them. Here's the first draft of the slides. They bring it back to me, and I'm thinking, like, what happened here? So if someone has the self-awareness to go, I don't know what excellence looks like. Yeah. What should they do? Should they find a friend, a coach, someone that knows what it's like and say, hey, you go find me the designer, or is there a designer you would recommend? Because while you want to trust them to do the thing, if they have a certain amount of self-awareness that they don't trust themselves to do the thing, what should that person do? What should their approach be?
That's really tough, right? Because you've just described a situation where someone literally has maybe a blind spot, when it comes to a discipline, whether it be slide design or whether it be the tonality of their voice, and they're just not getting it. There's many elements within delivering a presentation that sometimes you have blind spots. The way that I approach that, especially in a coaching context, is I try to illustrate. And I usually don't use myself if I can, sorry. Like obviously in a masterclass situation, if I'm delivering to people, I will use myself a lot because I'm live, I'm there, I'm right now. But sometimes these coaching scenarios, you have time to put together something, someone will respond via email. So you can drop in as enough collateral online that you can hit up and just say, this is what I mean by excellence. Use the top of the tree. Or you can even be, if that, because you've dealt with this person before, that might have the opposite effect, because you got to be careful there, right? Because if you show someone excellence, like if you got a cousin who's trying to learn guitar, you don't play them Jimmy and say, that's really shit because listen to this. And you go, well, and that person will pick up a guitar again, right? So what you do is you take the guitar off and you show them chord progressions, and then you show, well, see, I've only learned these and I can't do that. But you see the distance between me and you is much smaller than Jimmy, right? So maybe there's a way as well to find a little bit low-hanging fruit there and find someone the next step up. So again, conditions, right? And we know this as coaches. Sometimes you can't throw the kitchen sink at someone. You just need to give them a little step, because it's going to take a while to get to them. So yeah, finding other examples is the shorthand route to illustrate the deficit in excellence. Yeah, and there's so much collateral online.
Yes. What is your take on the current landscape of virtual presentations? I mean, obviously during COVID,
terrible.
During COVID, everyone was forced into 99.9% of their presentations being virtual.
Yeah.
What is your sense ongoing? I mean, what percentage of a speaker's ongoing presentations should they think, in a given year, 95% are going to be in person, 5% are going to be virtual? What do you think is that ongoing percentage that speakers should be aware of and embrace and excel in?
I don't know. I'll be very honest to answer that. I don't know what the percentage should be, because it might be different for certain speakers and topics and audiences. Some audience definitely haven't come back, in a sense of their events have fallen over. The annual sector industry events used to happen every year at Las Vegas, whatever, and it's not happening because they suddenly realize they can do it. And people who used to go saying to them, we prefer it online because it fits in with our schedules and all that, and the price point's much better, blah, blah, blah. So some of them aren't coming back, which is intriguing. Some definitely are, so cool. But the smaller ones as well is really fun, because now you're seeing people, I'm seeing a lot of my mates starting to online webinars, online events, and inviting other people to speak at them, because now the threshold for curating talent in an event, inverted commas, experience online, using something like Livestorm, Google Meet, Riverside, whatever it is, whatever platform you're playing around with, is easy now. And you just drop people the link and you host it, or even on LinkedIn Live, whatever, you can do this now and curate people. So to have that as a speaker, have that skill level of going, yeah, I can also deliver something online. It's not the same, and it should, that's my point, is usually it shouldn't be the same. There's going to be some speakers who can just port over their content online, and it'll work in both mediums, right? What usually doesn't work is how they deliver it. And the worst thing you can do online when you're speaking is to share your screen. And what happens when most people speak online is they share their screen. And there's so many reasons to stop sharing your screen. And Josh, I can see you're like, oh, shit, I do that.
Talk us through it. What's happened?
So you've probably heard about cognitive fatigue, or Zoom fatigue, it's become known as. I prefer cognitive fatigue because then we're not talking to Zoom, and you shouldn't use Zoom. It's terrible. But anyway, the point is cognitive fatigue.
Special thanks to our sponsor, Zoom.
Thank you very much, Zoom, for coming today. The point is that the cognitive load on one's brain when we jump online is hard to continue. What I'm saying is basically we're built cognitively in person. We're attuned to react to human faces, shapes, nuances of body language and emotional cues in faces, right? So we're built for human interaction, and we've become very, very good at it as single human entities. Cool. Then we're at events and we got someone standing up and they're further away, but we got the screens next to them, so we feel closer to them, or we can hear them intimately, but still there's a deficit there going on, so the speaker has to work a little bit harder, right? So we know that. Now put another bigger medium or veil in between you and the audience now, which is called the screen. So there's now a massive reduction in the human nuances that we look for, which is the physicalness of a human, which is their emotional cues in their face, how they're enjoying the physicality of them, that the bigger body. And usually online, you can only see probably from the chest up anyway. You know, so they're missing your hand signals, you're missing kind of where they're moving their body with and stuff like that. And online, you're reduced much smaller and you're 2D. So you're smaller, you're 2D, and your brain's going, don't pay much attention to that because it's neither a threat or something to be interested in. It's not food and you can't mate with it, usually. So that's your brain kind of kicking in and saying, don't pay it much attention. So you as an audience member got to work harder to pay attention to the person online trying to speak to you, hence the Zoom fatigue. And this is being studied by Stanford. Check out their research. But if you go into it, it's not just that you're spending more time online, which people mostly quote it. Oh, I've got Zoom fatigue because I've been online for so long. It's not just that. It's your brain is really overcompensating for attention. Because as humans, we like human-sized things. Now you've been reduced smaller and smaller. Now add in someone sharing their screen. If they're lucky, depending on what platform you're using, they might still remain on screen, but now they're like a postage size stamp version. And what I've just described about reduction of attention, now you're even smaller. Right. So now, and because there's a screen in between you and I, and there's something called new tab on your browser that I can open that no one knows that I'm doing. And I can check Facebook very quickly because, you know, my message or my email, right? No one knows I'm doing other activities where if you're in a stage situation or room situation, people can see someone is looking at their phone, not interested. And you as a speaker can see that as well. Now you have nothing, right? And now you're a postage size stamp. So now the audience is disinterested because their brain is getting in the way. So now you just shared your screen and you probably got bad slides and you're probably speaking to the slide, but now you're going off on one and the slide is still there. So now the audience member can click on that new tab and do whatever they want and stuff and blah, blah, blah. So those are the reasons why you shouldn't share your screen. Now there's reasons how to get around that. You know, you can use things like OBS, Open Broadcasting System, which I always quote because it's an open source piece of software that sits between you and the streaming platform that you're using, and you can also create scenes in it that you can split yourself, or you can even do newsreader style, which is always fun if people like that. So you can have the little graphic hover to your left or right, and you feel like a newsreader. But you control that and you remain on screen as much as possible, especially as big as possible.
Yes.
So that people can see your physical and emotional nuances that communicate much better than the words you're saying, right? Or augment what you're saying or amplify what you're saying rather than replace it. So those are all the reasons that you got to think through when it comes to delivering online and why sharing your screen. You should use it as the last resort.
I love that. Thanks for sharing. I'd never considered, you know, the sort of zooming out and shrinking down of the human that happens. It was very interesting running the speakers agency, seeing our speakers pivot from in-person to virtual. And looking back on it is interesting. I want to get your take on this. The ones who struggled the most making that transition were the most interactive speakers. So they were either speakers that used a lot of comedy and that, you know, that kind of feeding back of the audible laughter let them know that they were doing well, that they were on course, that they were on pace, or highly interactive, sort of raise your hand or turn to your neighbor and do those sort of most of our speakers that was their style. they really, really, really struggled in a virtual context. And then, juxtapose that with they're used to going out there and killing it. Again, this is like a tried and true presentation. People are laughing, they're clapping, they're interacting. And now they're put on Zoom or whatever virtual platform, and it feels like crickets to them. If someone is that, say, funny type of presenter, what would be your recommendation to them in a virtual setting?
There's a couple of things you can still do to ensure, in inverted commas, audience participation, right? Asking for cameras on, right? As a standard, if people are willing to. At least gives you a visual cue of how well it's going, right? Because you can see people kind of smiling at the right places, or kind of like, kind of maybe even laughing because you might not have the mic on at that point, which is fair enough. There's other things around interactions, which is real fun because it's a digital context. You have more maybe people online, but you can play around with stick your hand up, stick your left hand up. Make sure you have a piece of paper in this one, because we need you to draw or write letters down or whatever and hold that up. So you can create some really fun interactions through the mediums that you wouldn't usually get in a physical setting. Make sure that you have 2 cups of coffee or whatever, two cups. You can build in things for reasons then you can play with, or colored things as well. Hold up that color versus something else, anything that color. And you can see that people have brought like their teddy in that color versus a mug, like I said, or like just a scarf versus seriously, you've got one of those. It's a ski. Why did you bring a ski just to hold up, right? It's just fun. I've been in those situations. You can have a lot of fun with it. Again, it comes through your own creativity because you are restricted by the medium. But as we know, and I'm going to use the Jürgen Leith quote here, which I often use, which is constraints liberate your imagination. So it is constraining in terms of what you just described, these physical, interactive, comedy-centric presentations, now constrained by this. But how can you play with that as a constraint? How can you create comedy out of the constraining of there's 100 people online and all I can see is their faces? So maybe you can like just say, get as close to the camera as you can. I'm just going to take a screen grab and blah, 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 you know what I mean? And just like play around with all these constraints as a device to play, if that makes sense. And that comes again, there's so many ideas that you could have based on the content you're then delivering. You should have it.
When virtual presentations first started being a thing, I did I think 2 of them. And so this is now's the part of our show where I just do a bit of therapy on you. But there also might be a diva nugget in this that you'll find interesting and can have an interesting comment on that can be helpful beyond just our conversation here. So I did a couple of virtual presentations. To be very candid, I found them so soul sucking. I just said, never again. Never, ever, ever again. So I thought, what are the conditions that I can respectfully demand that I think will just turn away everyone that's requesting I come and do a virtual presentation? Because my speech to folks that work with kids is either very funny or very emotional and sort of raw and emotive. There's certainly a practical component, but it's those 2 things. And just delivering funny or vulnerable stuff into a black screen, I found very soul-sucking. Now, that might be my own personal psychology, and it probably is. So here was the diva conditions I set up. I decided I am going to record my message one time and one time only. And then what we will do is each time someone requests a virtual keynote, and they're paying a handsome fee for this. Yeah, and again, we're pre-communicating exactly what they're getting.
Mhm.
No surprises. We're pre-communicating. There will be a 1-minute custom intro.
Right.
Hey, Warlock School District. This is Josh. Today we're going to be talking about blah, blah, blah. Followed by the kind of 30 to 40 minute, very well produced, pre-recorded keynote. And then I would come on for live Q&A.
Mm.
And I found in doing that, because the Q&A, that's where it's like, I'm no longer then trying to persuade or inspire. I'm just kind of speaking to the nuances that the people were curious about as they were listening to the keynote. That was a situation I needed to put myself in to feel like my strengths and weaknesses could do well in a virtual environment.
Gotcha.
Do you feel that approach is wise, or what advice would you have given me if I came to you a couple years ago and said these virtual presentations are sucking my soul dry?
Yeah, I tell you to stop doing them because we don't want to do things like that. But what you have devised, the pre-record, is a brilliant way of getting around something like that as a package. Yeah. I would say then it lacks a little bit of soul, right? Because
Yes.
they want you there, but you've bookended it. You have the personal introduction, then you got the content, and then you'll be available for the Q&A.
Yeah.
So they get the best of both worlds from you. They still get the highly produced content, which is what you're getting booked for, but they also get you to ask those squirrely questions at the end. That's all great, Josh, but what about? Which you then kind of go in and add the kind of flavor to. So yeah, that's a brilliant way. And I advocate pre-records if you can do it, but also only in the context of what you just described. If you have something that's packaged and repeatable, and you don't like laying different beats down, which we described earlier as a way you don't mind delivering similar things because you like to play differently in terms of how you deliver it, which I do. I deliver similar stuff when I'm online. When I do my presenting engagingly online content, someone books me, it's pretty much the same content, but how I deliver it, I change like how I deliver it, and I change the order of it, and I have fun with it. And I also try to get Q&A as I go as well.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the other way I would approach it, is not think about it as a monologue, which a lot of people think presentations are. They never are, by the way. They should always be thought about as dialogues rather than monologues, even though you're the only one speaking. There's other people in the room that are telling you stuff.
Uh-huh.
They're speaking as well, but in a different context, whether they be slumped in their chair because they're looking, like you say, online, you can see that they're just like staring out the window and they're gone, right? They're telling you something there. They're having an impact on you versus in person, right? You can tell when people are engaged, but they're communicating to you. So it's not a monologue, it's dialogue. So in that dialogue piece, you can then evolve participation throughout your online delivery, which in your world, what you just described, doesn't happen. I'm not saying there's a deficit there. I'm just saying that if you wanted to have another crack at this, wanted to do it more live, and then you can fold in stuff like the technology I mentioned, where you're in control of the production using like an Elgato Stream Deck, that you can cut the different cameras, right? And you can get a little bit John Oliver, and you can turn to one camera and just have that as the comedy beat, and then turn back to the other camera and you're giving the lesson, right? And then you can drop in that video at the right time, and you're controlling all that with OBS and with the Elgato Stream Deck. So you're in control of the production, and you can change it as well on the fly. And that, again, just taps into my, I suppose, preference of being more live in inverted commas versus your preference, which is I just want to give someone the best quality of me. And I don't think that's me turning up every time to deliver online.
I felt like, I felt like if I keep doing this virtually, the fifth or sixth one, I'm going, there's going to be some bitterness. Not at the audience and not at the message, though those are dangers for us as speakers as well, but at the format, that there would have been some bitterness in me about the format that would have slowly leaked into the presentation. And so I thought, let me be incredibly candid, because I saw other folks in the marketplace or business webinars and such that I would attend. They would say it's live, it's clearly pre-recorded. You're insulting your audience by not being frank and saying, hey, look, this is pre-recorded, but even though it's pre-recorded, it is for you and you're going to get this out of it. I thought, if I can be both selfish and selfless in this transaction and be extremely explicit and clear about what they're getting and what they're not, and say that the reason I'm doing this is to give your audience the best of both worlds. The make them laugh, make them cry, make them write things down, and that opportunity for us to have a unscripted, candid conversation, unpacking some of the key ideas we just discussed.
But I wanted to ask you a question on that, because I'm interested in when you did the Q&As online now through the virtual mediums. I was quite elated by the level of emotional vulnerability that some people showed, because it's a virtual platform now. Because in Q&A, usually it's someone sticking their hand up in person, right? And having a mic maybe, or standing, waiting in line to get the mic and things like that. And it's a highly vulnerable position to be in, because now you're being seen and you're being heard. This is in person. If we're doing it now online, you got a little bit of anonymity, yeah, and especially because you can have both turn your mic and camera on to ask the question versus hit us up in the chat to ask any questions. Did you have any kind of revelationary kind of, that's interesting, the level of, or the types of questions, because they're coming through a chat system versus an in-person stand-up and speaks system?
Honestly, no.
Okay.
However, there is a clear delineation in my world. So I talked to two distinct group of adults: educators, folks who work with kids and students, and then parents, where this is their kid. This is, and that is where the delineation is, because if I'm talking to educators, they don't mind, and maybe it's that they're standing in front of a classroom and delivering themselves 5 days a week, but it's also not their kid. So if their question is, there's this kid in my class and he reminds me a bit of how you described yourself as a kid, and boy, every third day he makes me want to quit this profession because of this. It seems like educators can be quite vulnerable because it's not their kid. Parents, I've made the mistake of saying, we're going to have a Q&A time, stand up and ask your question. That is a recipe for disaster, because you're talking about, there's a community that I'm at, and now you're going to stand up and air your family drama.
Good point.
But in those environments, if I set up a analog, either, hey, there's a note card under your chair, write it down. There'll be someone bringing around like a church offering plate. Just throw your question in there, or text your question to this number. Then those questions are incredibly and beautifully courageous and vulnerable.
Yeah.
But I guess it's about kind of thinking through, where would their ego or reputation kind of be vulnerable? And because of that, how should I put them in an environment where they can feel safe being vulnerable?
And that's creating, again, back to the conditions, providing a medium and mediums that people can be honest and vulnerable through, like you say, the note card system. When I do my masterclasses, I do something similar, because we have Post-it notes. So make sure we got Post-it notes. And at any point, people can just write a question on there, and during the breaks can just put them on my computer, or at the front. So I receive them. I don't need to be given them. I just put them down there at some point. And that's an incredibly powerful way to allow people to have voice. And that's what we're in it for. All of us, right? We're in it to enable people to have voice in whatever way they want to have their voice.
Yes.
Because for some people it's through dance, for some people it's through sports, for some people, but they're expressing themselves. But everybody has questions around things, especially charged topics, which you definitely do more of and in situations of. And I wanted to ask you a question, how you handle these charged situations, because I find myself now, especially in my masterclass situations, where I usually take up to 12 people. I never have more than about 12 because I want a small group of people. Because of the stuff we do is highly participatory. I get people to stand. I get people to deliver talks based on different models and nuances. I get to deconstruct the gracefulness of delivery, right? So the physicality. So I want a small group that we can get through and create space for all people to do that. However, what I've discovered is, I would say, just over half of all the masterclasses I deliver in those small groups, someone will cry. Now, luckily, as you know, my first career was in youth work, which is how we kind of, connected and stuff like that. I'm okay in those situations where people are vulnerable and I can manage that. But I'm also really interested in how you manage those situations when people are highly charged through emotion and display it. And then how do you create the conditions for them to still communicate?
Do you think these folks in your master classes are crying because of the content they're kind of writing down or sharing? Or is it a sort of a breakthrough that comes with them overcoming the fear of standing up and talking in front of a group?
It's usually the latter, but sometimes it's the first. But it's usually that release of, I haven't been looking forward to this. Because I hate public speaking, and now you've given me the tools and potentially a way of managing my biggest fear, and I just did it. And there's this because it's usually tears after. It's never before, or very rarely is it before. It's usually after, which is a release of experience. But I'm interested in your situation because I'm sure you've been in those situations as well. Different, but
you always ask such great questions, DK. I mean, I have two specific thoughts on this that might be relevant or helpful. I'll talk about during the presentation, then I'll talk about after. So during the presentation, my unorthodox philosophy has always been, just because I'm telling a sad story does not mean I need to be emotively sad.
Okay.
Because I'm not sad now. And so I think my thing is, I'm going to be honest. So I'm going to tell you a sad story, but I'm telling you this sad story from a position where now in my 40s, I'm healed. I'm no longer sad about it. And so the nerdy presenter side of me likes that juxtaposition of a sad story told with strength. But I also read some research paper that kind of delved into if the presenter emotes too much, it kind of takes from the audience of being able to feel it, because now most people are rather empathetic, and so they're kind of worried about the presenter, or they want to comfort the presenter, or they're a little stressed about the presenter. And so they're kind of focused on you instead of themselves, and thinking, okay, how does this guy's experience he's communicating relate to me? So that's the first kind of thought I have about is during the presentation. Now I've seen folks who are quite emotive during. I'm fine with that as long as it's genuine, as long as it's true, as long as it's not fabricated. And to me, a punchline of a joke, yes, that's rehearsed, that's often written, it's often repeated, fine-tuned, and it does need to be done the same way every time for the good of the audience. Queuing up fake tears, I just go, that feels manipulative. And above all, especially in the type of communication we're doing, which is very, social emotional in education, the worst thing for me to do would be for the audience not to trust me for some reason. Secondly, after the presentation, indeed, because the topic, parts of it are quite heavy, folks do have the reaction of, let me stand in line to talk to this guy and tell you the worst thing that's ever happened in my life too, as an odd way of saying thank you for you telling us about some of the worst things that have happened in your life.
Indeed.
That I nod, I listen, and my thing is to point them to someone who's not leaving town in 5 hours, to unpack this further with.
Yeah, of course.
Because, as the guest, I'm a safe vessel. I get that. That's fine. But I can't, I can't help you tomorrow with this. So I hope you have, or I hope you can utilize this temporary courage and inspiration I've given you to go find that person who can help you tomorrow.
And that's the crux of my question. I think I asked the wrong question, because now you've brought up the reason why I asked that question, which is the responsibility, which probably taps into some of the coaching that you've done. Is we have a responsibility as storytellers to understand the emotional impact of our stories. And I'm now in a position where, I shared about my hearing impairment. I shared about some other vulnerabilities in my life when I'm speaking, not because I'm trying to, woe is me. I'm trying to illustrate that I had a deficit, and wow, now I'm speaking for a living, even though I have speech therapy because I'm hearing impaired. And it's kind of a cool story. It's an origin story, right? But with the question I asked you, which is about how do you manage emotional and vulnerability from people who are displaying that, and you just said the perfect thing, which is, yes, you got to give them a pathway, but it's probably not me because I'm leaving town in 5 hours. I didn't think like that. I took it on as a responsibility.
Yes.
And I've been heavy with that. I'll be very honest. And other probably speakers listening to this might have similar experiences where they are speaking and they create an emotional response that they might feel heavily responsible for. And your wisdom there about, well, you that's a good thing that you've uncovered, but you've got to give them then maybe pathways. It's the classic case of, if you're talking about youth suicide, make sure you have youth suicide hotlines and resources on hand. You don't just go in there and open up a can of worms and then leave.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Because then you're creating a mess. Yeah. I mean, I made so many mistakes in my first decade, and one of 72 of them was, thinking it was my responsibility to help that person, for weeks and months after, and that's not my specialty. It's not what I'm qualified in. It's not. At the end of the day, they wouldn't be best suited being helped by me, though it intrigues them because they heard me share my story. But that's a very common responsibility to either dismiss and not recognize the preciousness of what you're doing, or to too fully take on yourself and think that, you have to answer every email, every DM, every inbound communication that comes in as a result of this storytelling.
Gotcha. Thank you. That's some good advice for me there. I'm going to steal like an artist, as Picasso said.
Yes. I have a question of vulnerability for you, which is your hesitancy to self-promote. I want to talk about this. So I have a two-part question. What is it that other speakers and authors, without naming names, what is it that other speakers and authors have gotten wrong about self-promotion that has turned you off to self-promotion? And then what are you getting wrong in your reluctance to self-promote just because a handful of bozos out there have done it very sloppy?
Thank you. Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for noticing. That's something a couple of my mentors in the past have said. You're very bad at telling, once you do something kind of half good, telling the world about it. And I suppose that comes from my, not to turn it into a therapy couch, but my upbringing. It's a very humble, tall poppy syndrome idea of, just get on with things. So I just get on with things. So after I've done something, I get on with the next thing. But so that's my lack. You're so right. And what I've seen other people is probably, I'm not into capitalism. I definitely need to pay the rent. Don't get me wrong. And I think we've gone too far the other way with chasing the dollar rather than chasing the purpose and chasing the impact rather than just that. Don't get me wrong. You got to pay the rent, as I mentioned. And I like to have a little bit of coin. But yeah, maybe there's a hesitancy that I see in so many people doing things that then they lean too heavily into because it's, for example, writing a book. Yeah. Like I've written 2 now, and it's painful for me to write a book. Now with ChatGPT, it'd probably be much easier, but I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in the grind. I'm interested in the soul that it produces in a book because of the grind, right? And ChatGPT will take that out of it. The best deconstruction of AI and the impact of that, I heard from another podcast. I can't remember. I'm sorry, I can't quote it direct. But they talked about when you listen to a James Brown song, him stretching to get that note, in the stretch, that's where the soul is. Right. Now AI and computer technology and all that with hyper auto-tune and stuff, you lose all that, right? Because they want it to be perfect. I want perfect. I want to hear the bend in Jimmy's note when he's trying to get that note, or Bonham hitting the rim shot because he's just trying to get more out of it, right? It's in that stretching that we find, I can see the soul in that. And that, I suppose, is why I don't promote my stuff, because I see so many people promoting things that it doesn't look like there's soul in it when they're promoting it. All it is they're just trying to validate. And I think validation comes from the work itself. The process is more important than the product. And I've always thought that. Now, that's to my deficit. And you're right. My best scenario would find someone who is a PR machine and likes to just only do that, and they take my stuff and go with it. And I wouldn't mind sharing my purse with that person. But you're right. Yeah, I just don't see enough people just having fun in that space. All it is just copying, it's hitting the streams up, and it's just a tiradal kind of a downpour, and there's no soul in it. Like when I did the Presenting Engaging Online course, I promoted it for a little bit, and then I just stopped. No one knows it's there anymore, and I'm just like, I do this, and then rolls out every now and again. I get a few people buying it. It's like cool validation, right?
So, but what promoting of that course did you do that you thought, okay, this is both promoting the thing, but this is fully DK. This is fully me. Yeah. I'm taking, some marketing best practices, but I'm doing it, as you do with your video series, with high fidelity, high standards, high taste. Were there any marketing activities you stumbled across that you go, okay, maybe in this way, like this is my path?
And it's just being more human-led. So having conversations about what you did to uncover why you did it and stuff. So I remember I was on Dan Pontefract, Leadership Now podcast, and Paul Teasdale podcast as well. And that was just real fun around the time I produced that. And that was the reason. It was TEDx Nelson. It was my book. It was the Presenting Engagingly Online. There's products out there in the world, and I've made a little bit of money, but not much out of it, because you're right. There's that. But the best version of me is when I'm in conversation with people, when I'm being honest and trying to find the right words, versus a PR thing or a tweet or a LinkedIn post, which I've done, don't get me wrong. But I remember putting out the bloopers of Presenting Engagingly Online and getting some good engagement on that. And I was like, that's kind of fun now.
Yes.
The ums and ahs and going, oh, fuck, what am I trying to say? The bloopers is funny anyway, right? But it humanizes. That's what it comes down to. If I feel it's humanized me through the process, then I don't mind promoting anything. Yeah.
I've always enjoyed the marketing side of things. I mean, as
you do it so well,
as you would probably assume, but I also do have a lot of snobbiness with anything that becomes at first trend setting, and then it's something, everyone is doing, at first it's like no one's doing a webinar, and then everyone's doing a webinar, and then 95% of webinars are crap. 5% are fantastic, but 95% of them are just a pitch fest with light content that's really there to sell you a thing. And then it's chat bots. And then it's, hey, we're having an online summit where we're pulling together all these people, and it's poorly produced, and we want you to spam your email list nonstop about it. So any of these kind of marketing channels, I see them sort of come up, and then they become quite popular, and then they get quite watered down, and then they become, almost the word in and of itself is baggage. If you're gonna host a webinar or a summit today, you have to work really hard to overcome the cognitive baggage that has with most people that have an email address, which is they've been invited to it.
Yeah.
They've tried a few. Most, not all of them, have disappointed them. And therefore, by even calling your thing that, it is problematic.
Mm-hmm. Well, I remember back in the day when you came out with your first speaker reel, right? And how arresting that was. And I think that's where I discovered you, through that speaker reel. Maybe I just remembered how arresting it was, because there was hardly anybody putting out speaker reels back then, because the technology, it was like 2007, maybe 8, something like that. Maybe I'm dating us here, but or you can go, yeah, that was my first speaker. But I remember seeing something so arresting. I was like, damn, this boy's got it, right? This is like pure illustration of craft through a non-marketing modality of just showing rather than telling.
Yeah. And
that's where the difference in marketing and storytelling comes in, I think. Showing someone something is just, storytelling, right? Where marketing is like telling me what I should know.
Yes.
Don't tell me, show me how to do it. And like you say, when you come back to then webinars, and that's why I did the Presenting Engagingly Online, or wrote the book in the way that I did it, or did, as you referenced kindly, my Creative Welly approach is you look at what's out there, you learn from it, and you take the best bits of it.
Yes.
And then you try to mash up something that's slightly different, or different enough that people will turn ahead again. And you do it with that beautifulness and that intent to quality. Really try to lean into the idea of quality. And then that comes back to taste. So a lot of themes, coming back here. So I'm always interested in, because I'm thinking about doing another podcast soon, but I'm not interested in doing it in the normal way. Not that the normal way is done and trite. It's just done. That's all. Mm-hmm. But maybe some things are done for a reason, right? There's classical music hasn't had an update for a while, and there's a reason for that. Yeah, because it works. Yes. It's classical music for a reason. Don't get me wrong. You get the Vanessa Mays trying to break open the door of doing it in a cool way, right? So, but it's still classical music.
Yeah.
So there's something to be said about something becoming standard, but equally in our digital age, very quickly it becomes boring. And in a PR marketing discussion, there's only so many webinars that I can attend that feel like all this is a pitch for bigger services, versus like a conversation. Like I'm a big fan of long form video podcasts or long form audio podcasts that I can put on when I'm doing the washing up, or just doing something else that just needs a physical activity, but I don't, or when I'm walking, because I still walk everywhere and love. So it fills those gaps, but I can still have a cognitive kind of frame towards those things, rather than a punchy tweet nowadays. Or those used to be the currencies. Now longer, because I want more context rather than content. Mm-hmm. Context is king. Content used to be king. No, context. Give me a reason behind it, and we need more of that, because everything's gone a bit pithy and statement driven, especially in our politics and everything else. And it's easy just to lump everything in. It's like, nah, there's nuance there. I want to discover and uncover it, and you get that through these conversations.
Agreed. Well, DK, I appreciate the nuance and the context.
Good
and
stuff, man.
The great wisdom and advice you've provided in this conversation. So thanks for letting us get you up early. Thanks for making me skip my nap. This has been fantastic, and I know folks listening are going to really appreciate it.
100%.
Oh, thank you, Josh. Thank you, Jesse. I really appreciate what you're doing here, which is bringing stories to light and uncovering. So thank you for what you do.
Indeed. Thank you, sir.